Hello, everyone, and welcome to TreeLines podcast. I'm Paul Jeffries, Reforestation Advisor for ArborGen, and I'm joined today with Jason Watson, former classmate and fellow colleague, to discuss reforestation on his family property in Mississippi. With it saying that, Jason, would you like to say something, introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much, Paul. It's really good to be here. And so, as Paul mentioned, Jason Watson, I'm actually a director of U.S. sales for ArborGen. I was telling somebody recently that my career, I'm now in my 28th year of my career in forestry. It's hard to believe. I guess I'm officially a full rotation now, but it is great to be here and be a part of this TreeLines podcast to kick this off. And just thanks for having me.
No, thank you for joining us, Jason. And you're correct. I remember our professors at Mississippi State talking about how they know they've reached a pinnacle in their careers when they're actually able to climb trees that they planted at the beginning. And you and I, you're in your 26th year. I'm in my, or 20, did you say 26th or 28th?
28th, actually.
28th. Yeah. I'm in my 26th year. So, I guess you and I both have got hit that point to where we could climb the trees that we actually planted at the beginning. But so you have a family farm in Collinsville, Mississippi area. Tell us a little history about your family farm and how it came, and then a little bit about your management objectives.
Well, it is a place that is really special to me. I will say that I've got a little bit of the backstory. I have a little bit of land in Kemper County also that my brother and I share. And from another side of the family, the land that's actually in, it's a little bit north of Collinsville, Meridian area. It's up in the edge of Neshoba County, just below Philadelphia, Mississippi. And it's actually in my stepfather's family, although I got to think about this. I've been roaming around that place, and since I was, I think, probably since 1980 or 1982, and so I know it pretty well. I don't get to go and visit as much as I used to, obviously, from growing up there, but I definitely have seen it from when there were over 100 cows that grazed the farm and a couple of horses. But it was also, as many farming situations go, it was also a timber. Part of the land was in timber as well. You know, one of the blocks, a really big block that was in timber that actually just was harvested here in the past over the past couple of years.
Great. And so being close personal friends with you and visiting with you while you're here in Mississippi, I'd actually seen the timber that you're talking about that has just been harvested. And I think the first time I saw it, I didn't realize that it was on your family property, and you and I drove by, and I just made a comment about how great the timber looked and the amount of volume that it appeared to have per acre, and it was really quality timber on the stump. So when it came time to harvest your timber, did you have a management plan? Did y'all have a management plan that you were going by? And what avenue or what direction did you take when it came to deciding what to do, if it was time to start the track over or maintain it as it was?
Well, and I had mentioned this just a second ago, and I'll try to give you the condensed sort of history here without starting at Genesis chapter 1. I still feel like I need to give you a little bit of the history. So, as I mentioned, this has been and this property actually has been in the technical, is the technicality part of it, I guess, would be it's been in my stepfather's family, who I've been really close to my whole life, obviously. But it was initially his grandparents were the ones who settled the property, managed it, as I said, as a cattle operation, but also growing trees there, not really necessarily probably in an organized manner. And that's not a slight at all. I mean, that was the way that, in the early 20th century, we really weren't managing timber per se. And of course, I came around, like I said, in the late 70s, early 80s, as far as becoming aware of the property and kind of some things that were going on there. And I distinctly remember that in 19 probably 88 or 89, the biggest part that is managed as the timber operation was planted. I still remember it being site prepared, one of those little bubble helicopters with the bubble windshields on it.
Right.
I think maybe my Provine helicopter that kind of goes back a ways, but in Mississippi. But I remember those guys being the ones who site prepared it, and of course my stepfather's father was kind of helping direct that at the time, and then they planted. And of course, you and I'll kind of come around to this, and this will be a salient point as we go through this podcast. But I think I remember them planting probably 650 to 700 trees per acre over this probably 200. It was probably a 200 acres, 200
Right.
acres or so that was planted. I'm approximating, but I still remember, deer hunting, getting stands. As soon as I got a driver's license, I was trying to deer hunt on the property and wasn't very good at it. But in the course, it never really got much better either. But over time, I remember seeing the seedlings that were planted in the late 80s beginning to grow, and there were some places where there was good survival. There was other places where it was kind of spotty. I think probably because of the topography. But I do remember that stand development. But that was I gave you kind of a long history there, but that was also a long way of saying no. It was the operation was done well, but there was not a formal management plan or like a consulting forester that was involved per se.
Right. And that goes, I mean, that was typical of landowners back at that time. Can you give us a little background about, the how you went about site preparing it? I think you mentioned the helicopter, and can you give us a little background about the seedlings that you reforested with?
Yeah, I think that at the time, it was aerial. There was aerial site preparation that was done. Again, I believe it was by the Provine helicopter group, and the actual. I believe the seedlings came from there was a timber company that at the time was still an integrated, forest products company that actually sold the seedlings. But I will say this, the one thing I do remember is that, and I don't even remember the name. This is, going back close
Right.
to, I guess, 35 years or something like that, or 33 years, 34 years. I don't remember the name of the tree planter, but I do remember that there wasn't a lot of thought put into, and on nobody's fault at all. It's just kind of the way you did it. You got the tree planter to get the tree planting operation going, and he already had the seedlings. We didn't really do any
Right.
kind of seedling selection, and I think it was, hey, these are first or second generation seedlings, and this is what you're going to get, is the way
Right.
that it happened, and so I don't think we knew much about there was not any genetic selection per se that long ago.
Kind of, and sharing similar stories with my family and background. Back in those days, there just wasn't a whole lot of information. There wasn't a whole lot availability to the private landowner. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, I mean, and it was definitely an artifact of at the time. Gosh, it took a long time after that, even before there was. Well, I should say it this way, I guess. All of the integrated firms, and I'm talking about all of them: International Paper, Weyerhaeuser, Georgia Pacific. There were, gosh, at that time there was even McMillan Bloedel was over in Alabama. Probably Kimberly Clark, so Union Camp. I don't know if I already mentioned them, but they were all, and they were doing the right thing. They were doing a great job of deploying the best, doing really good research and development for their own timberlands. But private landowners really weren't involved in the selection. It was
Right.
just kind of like get the best that you can get that are out there in the market. And at the time, I think at this time in the late 80s, actually second generation seedlings. We don't even use that nomenclature anymore, but but at the time that was like the best that you could get. And at this time I have to stop and remember I was actually still in high school when this was going on. Didn't even know that I was going to have a career in forestry.
Right.
So I didn't know what was going on either. I was absolutely zero help
I
at the time.
still remember my father coming home just all excited because we were going to be able to reforest a tract with second generation genetically improved seed.
Yep.
And
That's
I
right. That was
think,
the hot ticket, the hot
oh,
item.
yes. I
Yeah.
mean, it was like the new Corvette coming out. I
Yeah.
mean, it was,
Yeah.
everybody was excited about it. And I do remember him using the term super tree. I don't know that that term was coined at that time with one company. It was, I just remember him being so excited because we were actually going to be able to access an improved loblolly seedling, which was, it up to that point was unheard of.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. I mean,
I,
that was like I said, that was kind of the hot ticket, the hot item to, gosh, it's hard to believe that by that time, genetic improvement really of loblolly or, southern yellow pine in general had really only been around for about 25, 30 years.
right.
I don't like to, neither one of us want to date ourselves like that as being around that long, but it is true. I mean, it was still only one and a half, two generations away from wild pine. It's hard to believe, but that was the case.
And if you've ever seen a wild pine, it's not a very pretty sight. So you recently just went through a timber harvest on your property. So can you give us some details about that and why you chose to take the steps, why you chose to harvest at the particular time that you did, and what concerns you about the timber at that time?
Yeah, well, certainly, as I mentioned, and of course, some people who think about a rotation age, they heard me throw out some dates about the 1988 or 89 would think, yeah, that was really time to harvest because I know, and it varies. I mean, it's all over the place. I know we work with people. We have a lot of partners that they harvest. They do final harvest at age 22. Of course, some other people do final harvest, as late as 40 or 50 years. I mean, we
Right.
have some partners that have those extended rotation ages and have specific objectives. But we just realized that, it was getting time. It was getting time to think about things like, okay, if we're getting some if we feel like we're getting some pretty decent prices out there in the market, the trees are getting to the size that I think everybody knows a lot of and of course I live, back up just a second. I live in South Carolina now, but in Mississippi, there's been even, we have pretty good markets here for saw timber, but in Mississippi, I would say that there's been a lot of new mill activity that has come into the state of Mississippi. It's been really, and Alabama, West Alabama from that standpoint, for that matter, and but a lot of what you're seeing now is a preference for smaller saw timber, and there are still, I know, some of the mills in Mississippi that still do like a bigger dimension size saw timber, but there are certainly some new mills that are coming in that prefer a smaller saw log. So we were thinking about that, and so we didn't want to kind of paint ourselves into a corner with only big saw timber.
Right.
And the other thing we were looking at is there. Thank goodness it wasn't widespread, but we were beginning to see some individual tree mortality from the competition that was in the stand. We're thinking about things like, okay, gosh, we're just one fire away from it wiping out the stand, and then we lose all the timber value.
Or one tornado, or
One tornado,
great line
exactly.
wind, or something.
Yeah, and I know that another thing that I know you kind of educated us on from your involvement with some of the Forest Health Co-op involvement that you have with Georgia, but also especially probably at Auburn University, is the brown spot needle blight. We were looking at wanting to be really careful to limit. It becomes, the older that stand gets, the more it becomes, risk begins to kind of come in, and to be, you lay down at night and you think of what are the risks. I mean, there's fire,
Right.
the tornadoes, but also now the brown spot needle blight. So we were wanting to be really careful. And I think the other thing that was happening there was, I don't know if people that are maybe listening to this podcast could remember that right after COVID, we were really worried about the markets. But what happened was the remodeling markets and, construction started to really take off. And so we were like, hey, we think we could get a pretty good price. This standing saw timber, all those other factors I talked about from a risk, we kind of reached this nexus of we think we can get some good prices, but we also need to really limit our risk. And I'm really close to my stepdad and his family. And, we began to have conversations like, hey, we need to be careful about this and think about liquidating this stand and getting somebody over in Mississippi that, we knew we could trust to help us market the timber and get a plan in action to start moving that along.
Right, right. Well, it sounds like that y'all had you had looked at the markets and you had compared what the markets were doing in the area at the time, and obviously
Mm-hmm.
that risk is there. I mean, the private landowner, timber landowner, is always one bad storm, one bad spark, one wildfire away from jeopardizing the whole investment. So that is definitely
Yeah.
something that landowners have to carry and have to worry about throughout the life of the stand. And let's face it, some
Yeah.
landowners only have one or two, maybe two chances to reforest in their lifetime. So it's very
Yep.
vital. So, that being said, as it come time once you did the timber sale and the timber sale was finalized and the timber was harvested, tell us a little bit about the steps that, or what you were thinking about at that time as your next steps or your next action items
Yeah.
going forward, looking to that next rotation. I mean, let's face it,
Certainly. Yeah.
your mother, your stepfather that are there, talking about dating ourselves and everything, they're in their retirement years. And while not too much older than me, you'll always be older than me, Jason, though. I've got that going for me. But, looking at that now, the next rotation, the finality of the next rotation is going to come about at a time when you and I are going to be in that retirement age. So as I know you worked with your family, you and I had a lot of discussions back and forth. I actually met with you and your family. We all had a group, your
Mm-hmm.
stepfather and mother. We had a discussion. Tell us a little bit about the decision and what factors drove the decision that you made, and as far as reforestation goes.
Well, I think and this is probably, I tell you, it's really amazing having the luxury of being in the business of, well, being in the forest industry, I should say, and then, gosh, especially being in kind of the reforestation sector and having been exposed to genetics research and development over so many years. I think the biggest thing is I've been exposed to some really great minds. They always say we stand on the shoulders of giants, and I
Yeah.
could never, there's no way I could ever thank all the people that taught me so much, and that I've really tried to be a good listener over the years and gleaned as much information as I possibly could from them. And I know that one of the things that I have really benefited from is thinking about it. And look, we're all guilty of doing this sometimes. We compartmentalize things. But the way that I've always tried to think about it is putting this whole reforestation exercise into an integrated approach. And so for us, I know what we were doing is thinking about, okay, we know that we want to do a really good job of site preparation. We want to make sure that we're not rushing things. We want to make sure that we get a good growing season of the competition to come back out before we spray. And I know a big rule of thumb that I've heard people talk about over the years that are herbicide have herbicide expertise. Greg Hay is one of the guys we work with that has been in the herbicide field for a lot of years. He has a lot of experience, but also just other research articles I've read over the years. You want to have that vegetation to come back about waist high before you spray, so you get really good coverage. You want a good tank mix that's going to have broad application over a lot of those competitors that are coming back. So that's one phase of the integrated approach, and we're actually we're getting ready any day now to do that, the aerial site preparation. But the next thing we had to do is start thinking about, how many trees per acre do we want to go back and plant this time around? Because it's going to be drastically different than what we did last time, because so much has changed in the market. Certainly, there's a lot of changes that are happening in the pulp and paper industry right now with consolidation, and some curtailment at mills that are happening. And where that property is situated in East Central Mississippi, one of the things that we know is that we have to be really careful about how many trees per acre that we start this next stand with, and be deliberate about it. And one of the things we wanted to, or that we could easily see, is that we've got really good sawmill activity that has come in all around the Neshoba County. I don't mean just in Neshoba, but I mean in Newton County and just across the line in Alabama. Still up in good sawmill activity up in like Noxubee County. But one of the things we wanted to be careful about is the stocking rate. Are we gonna do container seedlings, or are we going to do bare root seedlings? That's a big, decision analysis that people are looking at right now. Ultimately, what I really wanted to do was to come in with, advanced genetic seedlings where we could drop our stocking rate low. I think what we're going to end up doing is about 440 trees per acre with advanced genetics. And we've chosen a contractor that we can machine plant with, and so it'll be like what's considered V-blade or rough land planting. But we'll be planting the trees at 7 feet between the trees in the row, and 14 feet wide between the rows. And what we want to do is, we know that if we can get above 400 trees per acre, we'll be growing the same volume as if we were growing 650 trees per acre.
Correct.
But we just need to be very, very careful, and hopefully we get a really good control of the natural pine in the site prep spray, and that we're only growing about 400 to 450 after that year one. We're going to lose probably a few trees with that, but what we're doing is going in is we're planning to have bare root advanced genetic seedlings, machine planting those. Hopefully we're going to be planting them in December,
right?
And that's the plan, so that we can be really thoughtful of growing trees. Our ideal situation, Paul, is to go in, plant it, probably have low 400s after year one, but we're growing for chip and saw.
Right.
And hopefully just thinning one time, and then a final harvest much earlier this time in the early, 23 to age 25, something like that.
And that's stark different from what they used to do. Your family at the beginning, or the rotation that just ended, when they started that rotation, landowners were commonly planting 726, 750, and even some up into the 900 trees per acre. And let's face it, right, back in those days, the genetics that were available to private landowners was not the quality. And there were a lot of different factors then. There was a pulp mill or a pulp wood outlet where people, you could sell the pulp wood. But there was also a mindset there of, I've got to plant this many trees per acre just so I'll have enough to select from when it comes time to thin, that I can hopefully have some good quality residual trees to leave to grow on out to saw timber. Because it was just, you had to have a larger pool to select from to get to that end stage.
Yeah, and now with products, advanced genetics, and products like MCP, for instance, where we control the genetics. It's a or hybrid. I have a lot of people that a lot of farmers easily identify when you say hybrid. They
Yeah.
understand that you're eliminating that wild pollen,
Yes.
because we know that pollen can fly for hundreds of miles.
Yes.
But now that we have, we're doing a really, really great job of, with control pollination, hybrids, MCP, you know, with eliminating a lot of that wild pollen, that we just don't have to plant 700 trees to get 400 or 200 good ones. And the biggest thing is right now, I think, is, and our colleague Rafael De La Torre said this to me the other day, and it's just, it's a good reminder. Forestry is all about optionality.
Right.
And what we're trying to do is, if we go in there and we do really good site preparation, we really be mindful of the markets that we're planning into, where we just don't, I'm hoping that we do have some new markets that come about. I mean, there's some good things that are coming, maybe with aviation fuels, or taking small trees, turning them into methane for the shipping industry. But for the meantime, we've got to be really, really careful. But the greatest thing is, if we plant 440, 450 trees per acre, and pulpwood markets get really good again by age 13 or 15, that's fantastic. We'll
Right.
sell pulpwood. We'll thin it and sell really good pulpwood. But if they don't kind of resurrect themselves to what they used to be, we've got all the flexibility in the world to sell our wood as chip and saw, because we'll have grown a bigger stem because they've got more space to grow. But we got that flexibility. Whereas if we're planting 620 trees per acre, 605 trees per acre in a market that doesn't have a pulpwood market, we're limiting what we can do. We're limiting ourselves. We're having less flexibility from the get go, and that's a position we don't want to be in. So we want to be, and that's what we're doing on our own family land. So trying to practice what we preach there is being really, really careful, and that's not just for my own family's property, but it's something that we're trying to make sure that and I know you do this on a daily basis. We're trying to make sure that we're leading people down the right path, to make sure they're set up and they're at least informed. They may not want to do it, but at least they're informed.
At least they know what's available to them
Yeah,
as private landowners.
exactly.
Because let's face it,
Yeah.
these elite genetics, like we covered earlier, have not always been available to the NIPF, non-industrial private forest landowners like you and I. They
Right.
haven't always been available, and now they are.
Yeah.
So it's like, it goes back to the saying that you can put a saw log through a pulp mill, but you cannot put a pulpwood log through a sawmill.
Yeah.
And so you've got to be
Like a
prepared.
pulpwood through the sawmill. That's right.
Right,
Yeah.
you've
Exactly.
got to be prepared for that future market.
Yeah.
And the best way to do that is produce the best product, plant the best seedling, produce the best product, and then if the lower market's there, you have that option. You have that.
Correct. That's
Right.
right.
I
Yeah,
mean,
that's right.
so
And I think that too, for us, I will say this before I forget. The other thing too, we were trying to be careful, and is, you know, we're we're paying attention. We're trying to be careful with our budget, and that's why we tweaked, you know, the stocking rate a little bit. Still going with advanced genetics, but we know that from the progeny tests that we have to look at, and the way we know that these stands develop with smaller limbs, even at the lower densities, there's ways that you can really manage your budget to tweak the stocking rate down. Still do a good job of site prep, because that's what's most important.
right,
That's the foundation.
right,
But then still be able to get a really good contractor like we've gotten, and get really good machine planning job, but also then go in with the genetics we want, because we could tweak the stocking rate. There's no sense in buying, just to see a bunch of green trees at 600 trees per acre. There's no reason to do that. We wanted to go in and be careful with our budget as well.
So let me ask you this: did you, now that you're going down to that lower planting density and you're going to that, I believe you said 7 by 14, do you have any concern at all about the trees limbing up or the fast growth? There's a lot of misconceptions, a lot of myths out there that, fast grown plantation wood is just not as good as the natural slow grown. And then there's also a myth out there that if you plant the trees, if you plant so few trees per acre, they're going to, what we call in the industry, wolf trees. They're going to be very, very open crown, have large limbs. Some people say Christmas tree. Did you have any concern about that when you picked that spacing?
No, and it really goes back to, and it's probably sort of the luxury I have. It's almost like cheating a little bit or something. I get to see. I've seen a lot of these stands now. You and I've been to the
Yeah.
one down in Hattiesburg, where and not just in that area, but there's so many different operational and test trials that I've walked through where there's, again, where we've got the control of the parentage, the mother and the father. It's amazing what that does to, with MCP.
Right.
It's amazing what that does in terms of branch control. And it's now that I've been able to see trees that are 15, 18, 20 years old, that, where I've been able to walk through those stands and go, oh my gosh, look how different. I mean, I've seen, not that I want to do this, not that I'm advocating this, but some of the stands that are even, planted on 20-foot centers, 20
Right.
feet between the rows. I'm not ready to do that and go there.
Yeah.
But I've even seen it there where it still maintains its smaller branch diameter and habit. So that's one thing. That was one of the things you mentioned. And it does maintain it even at the lower stocking rates. The other thing about maybe the kind of the faster growing trees is that, even though these trees will grow or can grow at an accelerated rate, again, based on your site prep, the one thing that we have to remember is, and I just had a discussion with somebody about this, a really good discussion at the Georgia Forestry Association annual meeting that was in Savannah about a week ago, is that, the biggest thing, it's not really advanced genetics that are going to necessarily dictate wood quality, although they can have a positive impact. But the biggest thing is harvest age. I mean, if we plant a seedling, a genotype that was selected in 1956, and what people may call old school genetics,
Right.
we could plant those and cut them down for lumber at age 15. They're still going to be 70% juvenile wood. So it's really age is still the biggest factor. And we're not trying to really do that. We're still not going to try, and it's another reason we're going down to probably $450 an acre on the planting job, is we're still not going to cut chip and saw probably before it's 15 or whatever, 17 years old, final harvest around age 25. So it doesn't matter if you're planting an MCP seedling or old school first generation OP seedling. It's really governed by age.
Right.
But I will say this: behind volume gain with genetic advancement in loblolly pine, the second probably, and definitely second most heritable trait and biggest advancement we've made is in straightness of
Yeah.
the trees. So the other thing you've got going for you is there's a lot less reaction wood, compression wood or tension wood in that stem. And so the straightness of the trees has greatly enhanced the wood quality of that board that's coming out on the other end.
Right.
And like I mentioned, and as we just mentioned, the smaller limb diameter is going to really help too with the size of the knots.
The conversations I have with mill procurement foresters and mill managers, and when I ask them what's the one trait that you either causes you the most heartache or you hope is what you see the least of, and pretty much I'd say over 80% of the time they reply with small knots. Knots are just, and of course, the knot and the lumber is where there was a limb.
Yeah.
And if the limb diameter is large, it really destroys the grade value of that lumber that's coming out.
Yeah.
And let's face it, one of the higher valued products are veneer logs that are used for producing plywood, and it's even greater there that they have very small knots for the value of that final product.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things to think of. And even though mills have gotten so advanced in terms of engineering and, um, that they can take a log that may not be that straight and still optimize that log, it's still so much better. The straightness of that stem still helps yield so much more lumber on the other end, and with better quality, certainly.
Well, Jason Watson, I'd like to thank you very much for being our inaugural guest on the TreeLines podcast. This is something that we have been looking forward to doing for quite a while now, and look forward to busting some myths about forestry, talking about a lot of topics that our non-industrial private forest landowners encounter on a day-to-day basis. And so I want to thank you for taking the time and out of your day to be our first guest. And with that, I would like to bid you all farewell till the next episode, till we meet again.
Thank you again.